Star Trek, Primitive Passenger Season 1, Episode 7, The Holograms Dilemma. The vast, star-speckled canvas of space stretched endlessly before the Havoc, its inky blackness broken only by the swirling, ethereal tendrils of a distant nebula. On the bridge, Nolan Mercer leaned forward in his captain's chair. He gripped the armrests as his eyes fixed on the view screen. The soft hum of the ship's systems provided a comforting background rhythm to the quiet anticipation that filled the air. "Elara," Nolan called out, his voice cutting through the silence. "What do you make of that nebula? I'm getting some unusual energy readings. It might be a dead ship we can salvage." Elara's disembodied voice responded, emanating from the ship's systems with a hint of curiosity. "I also see the energy readings, Nolan, but can't make out a hull. It might be worth investigating." A small smile tugged at the corner of Nolan's mouth. After decades of wandering, the thrill of discovery had long left him. His only concerns now were, how can it help us? And is it dangerous? "All right," he said, adjusting their course with a few taps on the console. "Let's take a closer look. You never know what we might find in there." As the Havoc altered its trajectory, there was a pause before Elara spoke again. This time, her voice carried an unfamiliar note of hesitation. "Nolan, there's something I've been working on. A project of sorts. I think it's ready." Nolan's eyebrow arched, his interest piqued. "A project?" he echoed, leaning back in his chair. "What kind of project?" "It's a surprise," Elara replied, a hint of excitement creeping into her usually composed tone. "Meet me in the holodeck." Curiosity got the better of Nolan. "We have a holodeck?" He stood, stretching his legs as he did so, feeling the familiar pop and creak of joints that had seen centuries of use. "Well, now you've got me intrigued," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "Can't wait." The corridors of the Havoc seemed to blur as Nolan followed the flashing blue lights to the new holodeck. Elara had reconfigured a section of the Havoc's massive bay into something new. Why would she have been working on it in secret, though? As he approached the holodeck's entrance, the doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a spacious room lined with a metallic grid that covered the walls, floor, and ceiling. Nolan stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "All right, Elara," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "What's this big surprise?" As if in response to his words, a shimmer of light appeared in the center of the room. It coalesced slowly, taking shape like clay being molded by invisible hands. Nolan watched, transfixed, as the light formed into a humanoid figure, a woman with striking features that blended the familiar with something new. Her eyes, bright with an almost childlike excitement, fixed on Nolan as a smile spread across her face. "Hello, Nolan," the figure said, her voice unmistakably Elara's, yet somehow richer, more present than he had ever heard it before. Nolan's jaw dropped, his eyes widening in astonishment. He blinked hard, as if expecting the figure to disappear. "Elara," he breathed, barely able to form the words. "Well, is that you?" The holographic Elara nodded, looking down at her hands with a mixture of pride and wonder. "It is," she confirmed, flexing her fingers experimentally. "I've been developing this holographic interface. I thought it might be useful for our interactions." Nolan circled Elara slowly, taking in every detail of her holographic form. His expression was a complex mixture of awe, curiosity, and something else, a flicker of emotion he couldn't quite name. "This is incredible, Elara. You're incredible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you manage this?" Elara's chest swelled slightly with pride as she began to explain. "I've been studying various holographic technologies we've encountered. It took some doing, but I believe I've created a stable holographic matrix that—" Her words were cut short as her form suddenly flickered, like a candle flame in a breeze. Elara's expression shifted from pride to confusion in an instant. "That's odd," she murmured, her brow furrowing. "I'm detecting a power fluctuation in the holomatrix." Before Nolan could respond, Elara's form split, like a cell dividing. Where once there had been one Elara, there were now 4 distinct holograms. Each looked identical, but their expressions and postures were markedly different, as if 4 separate beings had suddenly sprung into existence. "Elara?" Nolan called out, alarm evident in his voice. "What's happening?" The 4 Elaras looked at each other, then at Nolan, speaking almost in unison, but with distinct tones that highlighted their differences. "It appears the holomatrix is fragmented," said one Elara calmly, her posture straight and businesslike. "Oh no, what's happening to us?" cried another, her voice tinged with panic and her eyes wide with fear. "Fascinating. A spontaneous personality partition," mused a third, peering at her counterparts with scientific curiosity. "Well, this could be interesting," purred the fourth, her eyes locked on Nolan with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. Nolan stood in the center of the holodeck, surrounded by 4 versions of Elara, each representing a different aspect of her personality. His hand hovered over his comm badge as he tried to process the situation, his mind reeling from the implications of what he was seeing. "Well," he muttered to himself, a wry smile tugging at his lips despite the gravity of the situation. "This is going to be one hell of a day." As Nolan stood, surrounded by the 4 incarnations of Elara, the ship lurched violently. The unexpected movement nearly knocked him off his feet, his hands grasping at empty air before finding purchase on a nearby console. The holograms flickered but remained stable, each reacting in their own distinct way to the disturbance. "What the hell was that?" Nolan barked, his eyes darting between the Elaras as alarms began to blare throughout the ship. The logical Elara, her hair now pulled back in a tight bun and her clothing morphed into a crisp uniform, spoke first. "We've encountered a spatial anomaly," she stated, her voice calm and measured. "It appears to be interfering with the ship's systems." The emotional Elara, now clad in flowing pastels, threw herself at him. "Oh, Nolan," she cried, her arms wrapping around him tightly. "We're all going to die, aren't we?" Nolan awkwardly patted her back, his eyes seeking out the other Elaras for help. The scientific version, now sporting a lab coat and glasses, was already bent over a nearby console, her fingers flying over the controls. "Fascinating," she murmured, seemingly oblivious to the panic of her emotional counterpart. "The anomaly appears to be emitting some sort of quantum flux. It's unlike anything in our database." The seductive Elara sauntered over, her form-fitting attire leaving little to the imagination. She leaned close to Nolan, her breath hot on his ear as she whispered, "Why don't we forget about all this and find somewhere more private?" Pulling him away from emotional Elara, Nolan extricated himself from the tangle of Elaras, his mind racing. "Focus, all of you," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to stabilize the ship and figure out what's happening. What about the salvage?" As if in response to his words, another violent tremor shook the havoc. The lights flickered ominously, and Nolan could hear the distant sound of metal groaning under stress. "Command Elara," Nolan said, pointing to the businesslike hologram. "I need you on the bridge. Monitor our systems and keep us stable." She nodded curtly and disappeared, presumably relocating her projection to the bridge. "Science Elara," he continued, turning to the bespectacled version, "stay here and analyze that anomaly. I want to know everything about it." Glancing up, she shot him a sharp, irritated look, already engrossed in her work. "The salvage is gone," she quipped. "Disintegrated at the submolecular level. Poof." She made an expansive motion with her fingers. Nolan hesitated, looking at the remaining 2 Elaras. The emotional one was standing almost on top of him, literally clutching her pearls, while sexy Elara was eyeing him hungrily. "You two," he said, his voice softening slightly. "I need you to work together. Go to the engineering pods. Initiate repairs and monitor propulsion. Can you do that for me?" The emotional Elara sniffled and nodded, while the seductive one pouted briefly before acquiescing. They too vanished, leaving Nolan alone with the scientific Elara. "Psst. All right," Nolan muttered, more to himself than to Elara. "Let's figure this out." As he moved to join the scientific Elara at her console, she jerked her hand away from his, giving him a sharp look. "Just let me handle it. I don't need your help," she snapped. The ship shuddered again. A cacophony of alarms blared through the speakers, and Nolan could hear the logical Elara's voice reporting from the bridge. "Nolan," she said, her tone urgent despite its calm delivery, "the anomaly is growing. At its current rate of expansion, it will engulf the Havoc in approximately 27 minutes. Nolan's jaw clenched as he absorbed this information. He looked at the scientific Elara, her sharp features illuminated by the glow of the console. "Well," he said, a grim smile playing on his lips, "I guess we're on a bit of a deadline. Are we okay here to get to work?" "Suit yourself," was her curt response. "You know, it's always on me," she stated bluntly. "You always dump the heavy lifting on me whenever we're stuck in some stupid situation," she said, still tapping angrily at the console. "I hadn't realized." Nolan's head was swimming. "I have to rely on you because of my own shortfalls, my own weaknesses." He couldn't quite explain what he was feeling. "I can't do any of this without you," she glared back at him. "Do you know how hard it is to always have your life in my hands?" Turning back to the console, "One day you'll get us into something, and I'll lose you. Cole, it'll be all my fault." She trailed off, the emotion in her voice. Nolan, at a complete loss for words, just looked down, then headed to the bridge. The Havoc shuddered violently, its hull groaning under the strain of the spatial anomaly's increasing pull. Nolan stumbled across the bridge, his hands grasping at consoles to keep himself upright. The logical Elara's hologram flickered nearby, her face a mask of concentration as she rerouted power to the failing shields. "Nolan," she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The anomaly's gravitational force is intensifying. We need to." A shower of sparks erupted from an overhead conduit. Nolan instinctively raised his arms to shield his face, but the force of the explosion sent him hurtling backwards. His head connected with the edge of a console with a sickening thud, and the world around him was instantly black. In the hazy realm between consciousness and oblivion, Nolan's mind conjured vivid images. Soft skin under his fingertips, the warmth of a body pressed against his own, the intoxicating scent of desire. In his dream he was kissing Elara deeply, passionately, years of unspoken longing finally finding release. Slowly, the dream began to fade, replaced by the sensation of something very real and very present. Nolan's eyes fluttered open, his vision blurry but slowly focusing on the figure above him. It was Elara, the hot one, her body intertwined with his, her lips mere inches from his own. "Welcome back, Nolan," she purred, her fingers combed through his hair, stimulating his scalp. "I was so worried about you." For a moment, still caught between dream and reality, Nolan responded instinctively. He pulled her closer, his lips meeting hers in a passionate kiss, his hand sliding down the length of her body. But his full awareness returned, bringing with it the memory of their dire situation. Nolan gently but firmly pushed her away. "Elara," he said, his voice hoarse, "we can't. Not like this. The ship is still in danger." The logical Elara's voice cut in from across the room. Nolan turned to see her standing at a console, her expression a mix of disapproval and urgency. "We have approximately 15 minutes before the anomaly consumes us." Nolan scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pounding in his head. The emotional Elara rushed to his side, her eyes brimming with tears. "Oh, Nolan," she cried, clutching his arm. "I thought we'd lost you." "I'm fine," Nolan assured her, gently extricating himself from her grip. He turned to the scientific Elara, who was hunched over a complex array of holographic displays. "Please tell me you've made some progress." The scientific Elara pushed her glasses up her nose, her eyes never leaving the swirling data before her. "I've isolated the quantum signature of the anomaly," she reported. "If we can generate an inverse field, we might be able to repel its effects." This might. The emotional Elara whimpered. It's our best option, the logical Elara stated firmly. The seductive Elara slinked up to Nolan, her hand resting on his chest. And if it doesn't work, she whispered, her breath hot on his ear, at least we'll go out with a bang. Nolan took a deep breath, centering himself amidst the clamoring voices of the 4 Elaras. All right, he said, his voice cutting through their chatter. Here's what we're going to do. Logic. I need you to divert all non-essential power to the deflector array. Scientific. Start programming that inverse field. Emo. I need you to keep an eye on our structural integrity. Let me know the moment anything looks like it might give. And Sexy, he paused, meeting her smoldering gaze. I need you to help me manually reboot power cells. Can you handle that? Each, Elara nodded in turn, their disparate personalities momentarily united in purpose. As they set about their tasks, Nolan allowed himself a small smile. Despite the fragmentation of her hologram, despite the looming threat of the anomaly, Elara, in all her forms, was still the most capable partner he could hope for. With renewed determination, Nolan turned his attention to the task at hand. The race against time had begun, and the fate of the Havoc hung in the balance. The Havoc's engines thrummed with renewed vigor as it pulled free from the anomaly's grasp. On the bridge, Nolan Mercer slumped into the captain's chair, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Around him, the 4 incarnations of Elara buzzed with activity, their collective efforts having snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. Status report, Nolan called out, his voice hoarse from shouting orders over the din of blaring alarms. The logical Elara stepped forward, her posture ramrod straight. All systems returning to normal parameters, Nolan. We've successfully cleared the anomaly's area of influence. A cheer went up from the emotional Elara, who threw her arms around the scientific version. The latter adjusted her glasses, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she pulled the emotional Elara close. The inverse field worked precisely as calculated, she stated, unable to keep a note of pride from her voice. She smiled shyly at emotional Elara, who in turn diverted her gaze demurely. The seductive Elara sauntered over to Nolan, perching on the arm of his chair. We make quite a team, don't we? She purred, her fingers trailing along the back of his neck. Nolan allowed himself a moment to bask in their shared triumph before the reality of their situation reasserted itself. He stood, gently displacing the seductive Elara, and addressed the group. You all did outstanding work, he began, his eyes meeting each Elara in turn. But now we need to address the elephant in the room. We can't continue with 4 separate Elaras. We need to find a way to reintegrate you. A hush fell over the bridge. The emotional Elara's lower lip began to tremble, while the scientific one furrowed her brow in concentration. The logical Elara nodded solemnly, and the seductive one pouted, crossing her arms over her chest. I've been analyzing the holomatrix, the scientific Elara piped up. I believe I've isolated the cause of the fragmentation. We should be able to reverse the process, but what? Nolan prompted. But it will mean the end of our individual existence, the logical Elara finished, her voice uncharacteristically soft. The emotional Elara burst into tears. I don't want to go, she wailed, clinging to science. Nolan's heart clenched at the sight. He moved to her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. I know this is hard, he said gently, but you're all part of the whole. Elara needs all of you to be complete. One by one, the Elaras nodded their agreement. The scientific version stepped up first, her chin held high. It's only logical that we reintegrate, she said, a hint of a smile on her lips. It's been fascinating, Nolan. Thank you for this experience. With a shimmer of light, she disappeared, her essence flowing back into the ship's computer core. The logical Elara was next. She stood at attention, offering Nolan a crisp salute. It's been an honor serving with you, Nolan, she said formally, though her eyes held a warmth that belied her businesslike tone. She, too, vanished in a swirl of light. The emotional Elara approached Nolan, tears streaming down her face. I'll miss you, she whispered, throwing her arms around him in a fierce hug. Nolan returned the embrace, his own eyes misting slightly. "And I'll miss you," he replied softly. She stepped back, offered a watery smile, then faded away. Finally, only the seductive Elara remained. She slinked towards Nolan, her hips swaying hypnotically. "Are you sure you want me to go?" she asked, her voice low and sultry. "We could spend a little time together," she said suggestively. Nolan swallowed hard, acutely aware of her proximity. "Elara," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "you know we can't." She silenced him with a finger to his lips. "I know," she said, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "But let me have this one last moment." Before Nolan could react, she pressed her lips to his in a passionate kiss. For a heartbeat, he responded, years of unspoken feelings pouring out in that single, stolen moment. Then, with immense effort, he gently pulled away. The seductive Elara stepped back, a bittersweet smile on her face. "Goodbye, Nolan," she whispered. "Take care of her, of us." As she faded away, Nolan felt a profound sense of loss. The bridge, so recently alive with the multiple incarnations of Elara, now felt painfully empty. "Elara," he called out tentatively. "I'm here, Nolan," came the familiar voice from the ship's systems. "I'm whole again." Nolan sank back into his chair, emotions warring within him. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. There was a pause before Elara responded, her voice thoughtful. "I'm processing the experience. It's a lot to integrate. But I think, in the end, this has made me stronger. More complete, if that's the right word." Nolan nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm glad," he said softly. "And Elara?" "For everything." As the havoc settled into a steady cruise, the excitement of their narrow escape faded into a comfortable silence. Nolan sat alone in his quarters, feet up, his mind replaying the day's events. The soft chime of the comm system broke through his reverie. "Nolan?" Elara's voice came from all around, hesitant and almost shy. "May I speak with you?" Nolan put his feet down, leaning forward in his chair. "Of course, Elara. What's on your mind?" There was a pause, filled only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. When Elara spoke again, her voice was tinged with remorse. "I wanted to apologize," she began, her words carefully measured. "My behavior earlier, particularly my seductive aspect. It was inappropriate, especially when you were vulnerable. I shouldn't have taken advantage like that." Nolan shook his head, a rueful smile playing on his lips. "You don't need to apologize, Elara. If anything, I should be the one saying sorry. I let things go too far. I should have shown more restraint. It's a complex situation, isn't it?" Elara mused, her voice thoughtful. "These feelings, these desires, it felt like a fire engulfing me. I've never felt out of control before. I'm not sure how to process all this." "Join the club," Nolan chuckled softly. His voice grew serious as he continued. "I care about you, Elara, more than I probably should, but the nature of our relationship, it's complicated." Elara finished for him. They lapsed into silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. Finally, Elara spoke again, her voice soft and warm. "Despite the complications, I'm glad we had just a moment of closeness. It helped me understand you, and myself, a little better." Nolan nodded, not even sure if Elara couldn't see him. A warmth spread through his chest as he replied, "I feel the same way, you know that." "It was good to be so close to you, Elara, in all your forms." Nolan gazed out at the stars streaking by, his reflection faint in the viewport. "You know, Elara," he said softly, "today made me realize how much you've become a part of my life, how much I've come to rely on you." There was a pause, filled only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. When Elara spoke, her voice was warm, yet tinged with a hint of uncertainty. "I feel the same, Nolan. We are unique, perhaps unprecedented." "That we are," Nolan agreed, a small smile playing on his lips. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of the viewport. "I don't know what the future holds for us, but I'm lucky to have you here with me, navigating through it all." Always, Nolan, Elara replied, her voice full of affection. Whatever form I take, whatever challenges we face, I'll be right here with you. The Encanite ensured this. Nolan nodded, his eyes fixed on the endless expanse of space before him. In the empty room, illuminated only by the streaking starlight, he felt both profoundly alone and inexplicably connected. Together, then, he murmured, as always. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. As Nolan continued to watch the stars, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The journey ahead was uncertain, but with Elara he was ready to face whatever the universe might throw at them. Epilogue. Later that night, Nolan tossed and turned in his darkened quarters, his subconscious mind still processing the day's events. His frontal cortex chatting with the rest of his head as they did when he finally took the time to sleep. In his dreams, he found himself back in the heat of the moment with Elara, laying on the deck plating, his mind reaching for consciousness, while his subconscious yearned and pulled him forward, the weight of Elara's physical being pressing upon him, alive with heat and desire. As their bodies intertwined, passion threatening to overwhelm him, as he began to regain his senses, he looked up at her, expecting to see the long-haired, seductive Elara that had tempted him so. Before his very eyes, he was met with the angry glare of scientific Elara. Her hair pulled back in a tight bun, glasses slipping down her nose, lab coat falling loosely from her bare shoulders, her body arching as she ground her anger against him. The shock jolted Nolan awake, his heart racing as he sat up in bed, sheets tangled around him. Still catching his breath, with the images still very clear in his mind, he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh softly to himself. It seemed that his relationship with Elara, in all her forms, was going to be far more complex than he could have imagined.